one thing I've had to kind of accept is like, even if we're not buying Bitcoin or cups of coffee with Bitcoin, like the thesis could still be working because there's so much opportunity at the inflation hedge level. And I'm curious about all this sort of new monetary policy that we've seen with COVID, printing a lot of money, every American's getting $1,200. How do you think these sort of like, maybe I want to say more short-term thinking for monetary policy or more willingness to print money is sort of what us Bitcoiners have been saying all along is the bull case of Bitcoin. And that's personally why I've been like adding to my position, because I see the fundamental thesis really playing out at a high level.
Yeah, so I think it's important to call out when there's a lot of money printed, yes, there could be inflation, but also there can be a lot of money printed and not get inflation, right? If you look at where we are right now, we're in such a deflationary environment that basically all the printing they're doing is having no effect on inflation, right? I mean, it's barely even stabilizing markets in many cases across asset classes. And so, I think that people have to get comfortable with this idea that Bitcoin can increase in value because of the inflation or the devaluation of a fiat currency, but Bitcoin could also increase in value while the dollar strengthens as well, right? So the kind of the opposite. If we stay in a deflationary environment, Bitcoin could still actually increase in value. And so I think that that's an environment that a lot of people previously weren't, kind of very bullish on, didn't think that that was possible. But I think we're starting to see this very wide-ranging deflationary environment right now. The printing that they're going to do and have done so far, I don't think is going to lead to some level of hyperinflation or something crazy. If they were to go and print, $20 trillion, sure, we may get there. But I think that they've been fairly prudent in the printing. It is a lot, right? But it's also the deflationary environment is pretty overwhelming, so it can absorb a lot of this. But that doesn't change my thesis at all in terms of Bitcoin and the future outlook there. And so I think people just got to start thinking about, what does Bitcoin's price action look like in US dollar terms in a deflationary environment where we don't get inflation? I still tend to think that it's going to go up in value, but we'll see.
And can you explain that a little bit? Because I'm watching some of your interviews about inflation. It seems like this is sort of scratching the head of a lot of economists of like, why is all this money printing not leading to inflation? Is it because technology is a deflationary force on prices and we have that sort of both of these forces working at once, or what's going on here?
Yeah. So, and to be clear, like these aren't my ideas. I have the great fortune of talking to a lot of really, really smart people, and they frankly are educating me, right? And so there's a gentleman, Brent Johnson, who runs a company called Santiago Capital in San Francisco, and he's got a theory that he's labeled the dollar milkshake theory. And the whole idea of the dollar milkshake theory is central banks around the world are injecting tons of liquidity into the global financial system. So think of that as kind of they're making a milkshake, right? They're literally just injecting trillions of dollars into that system, but only one asset gets the straw, right? One asset gets to suck all the value of that liquidity into that asset. And he believes that's the dollar. And so we're seeing right now is all that liquidity is just flowing to dollars, right? It's a liquidity trap or a liquidity crisis. Everyone wants dollars. Other assets are selling off and not really stabilizing. And so you got this really strong dollar compared to most assets. Well, over time, what happens is you eventually are going to have to weaken the dollar in order to stabilize and then increase the value of other assets, right? That's the only way that it occurs. Brent's theory is that's not going to happen for a while because of this dollar milkshake theory, where no matter how much liquidity they inject into the market, it's going to keep strengthening the dollar because all of those flows are flowing to the dollar. And the reason why that's important is it's all based on a relative analysis, right? If let's say that I have the US dollar over the Australian dollar, for example, and if we both print a bunch of money, but it's on a relative basis, the same amount, there's really no change, right? Because literally, relatively, we're doing the same thing. So yes, there's a kind of everything in the world moves up at once, but on a relative basis, it's all the same. And so you don't see a lot of the issues that I think people are really worried about. And so that's part of that theory. I highly suggest people go check out, what Brent's talked about. He's been talking about it for a while now, but it's starting to play out. And again, in that deflationary environment, Bitcoin can absolutely still increase in value, and I think it will. But I think that's just a nuance to the argument of, Bitcoin's going to increase because of hyperinflation. I don't think that's necessarily the only way that it increases in value.